Welcome to the Map Deck podcast, everybody. My name is Paul and I'm flying solo today because Jake and Simon are away, but I wanted to get in front of the camera because I got super excited because Cycling News have just released their new wheel aero test on the back of their frame aero test they did earlier in the year. Now, this is also on the back of another test done by Grand Fondo magazine, which is free to access, but also it tested other wheels that we're not that familiar with here in the UK. The Cycling News one covers an awful lot of the wheel brands that you're familiar with, but it is behind a paywall. I'm not going to release their data here. You should definitely go and check out the article if you're in the market for a super nice set of wheels. It's definitely worth reading. In this podcast, I just want to go through my key observations and what I've picked out from this, because this adds quantitative data on top of my qualitative understanding based on taking them apart, repairing them, riding them. And I think that's really, really important. And I've taken away a lot from this. I'm going to share those thoughts with you. Okay, first up, Syncross wheels did very well in both tests, which is always nice to see two opinions. However, they are only available through Scott dealers, so your mileage may vary depending on how local you are to a Scott dealer and how long Scott actually provides spares for that. That always makes me a little bit nervous. The thing that really stood out in the Cycling News one is that the Scope AirTech wheel was a clear winner both in weight and aerodynamics. Now, this is the one with the really impressive sort of fish scale type design on the rims and the 3D printed hubs that we featured in our video from Roulette. And we saw those wheels fitted to an awful lot of bikes. They're getting an awful lot of attention. And it is nice to see an independent aero test putting them at the forefront. They are expensive, but it's kind of reassuring to say that money is actually resulting in significantly lower weight and significantly better aerodynamics than the competition. So it's kind of, okay, you're expensive, but there's a reason, and that's okay, I guess. The nice thing about this is that they're being imported into the UK by Extra, and Scope are also putting in quite a lot of effort into worldwide distribution, which gives me a little bit more reassurance that spares are going to become available. Now, their second and third tier wheels, I can't really speak about. That's not really in the test and I haven't really seen them, but I am really looking forward to seeing these on test. We're due to review a set sometime in February. We've asked for them then because there's no point reviewing them now because the weather is so filthy outside. We probably won't get much decent testing actually done. But on the back of this, I am super excited to see more from the Scope AirTechs they're expensive. Anyway, the other thing I found interesting was Swissside wheels. Now, considering that the brand Swissside is famous for aerodynamics, they didn't score particularly well. And that's unusual because they really do put themselves out there as an aerodynamic centric brand, if you like, but didn't seem to play out in the results. Another observation, there's an awful lot less hookless designs being put forward for review. So in this particular test, it's only really the Giant with the Cadex, Envy and Zip are still sort of sitting there with their hookless design still hanging on in there, even in the face of all this current adversity. It is also quite nice to see all of this being tested on a Reap bike. So they've gone down to the Silverstone wind tunnel, worked with the guys from Reap by the looks of it as well, and got all these fitted. It's nice. It's such a nice bike. I can't wait to get one of those on test. Anyway, other notable things was DT Swiss noticeably absent, not just in terms of their wheels, but also in terms of their hubs. Normally you would expect to see at least a couple of wheels on test featuring DT Swiss hubs. I think now that ratchet design patent has expired, we're seeing more and more copycat designs. I mean, that's okay. It hasn't really proven to bring the price down of anything. All it's done is probably made things more expensive because now factories are producing multiple variations, with a slightly different diameter here, slightly different tooth count, and it's making it harder and harder for us and therefore you guys to hold stock, obtain bits that you need. So it's a bit of a shame because what used to be something so standard, so easy, is now becoming even more drawn out as people are manufacturing more different shapes and sizes in smaller production runs, which just adds to the cost. So it's frustrating because it was almost impossible to try and hold stock as a bike shop anyway. Now it becomes even harder because there's multiple suppliers, multiple distributors, multiple bits over years and years and years. So it's a shame to see DT Swiss almost being pushed out for no real gain for you in terms of price or reliability. The other thing that's appearing more and more is carbon spokes. On nearly all of the sort of the top end of these, carbon spokes are appearing. Some of them with captive hubs. And this is really important because for whatever reason, when carbon spokes really came out, they were appearing on hubs where if one or two spokes snapped, it would mean that there'd be a sufficient detension of the wheel that all the other spokes would just fall out of the hub. They weren't kept in there at least enough to allow you to bring your bike to a stop. So catastrophic failures. Looks like it's only Giant that are sticking with that design. Most of the other carbon spoke designs seem to have done something with their hubs to captive the end of the spokes, which is interesting. There's no sign of Fast Forward in there. That's probably because the UK distributor has stopped. They are still available in the UK. Shops like us are now going direct to Fast Forward, and that should hopefully play out in slightly lower prices for you guys, but we'll see. But yeah, I guess there's no one here in the UK managing their marketing for a UK-centric magazine, so it's a shame not to see Fast Forward there. Okay, on to some results. On the budget end, the Vision Mitrons and the Scribe wheels seem to do very well on the CDA to price. And my warning with that, neither of those two wheels ride particularly well or are actually that easy to work on. Vision are actually imported by Windwave here in the UK, and it's slightly easier to get spares, but I still wouldn't say it was an easy process. I've never really come across a Scribe wheel set that I could say was good to ride, and I would always think there's another option out there for the price you pay. So on the budget end, which we'll come to in a second, I'm still very, very hazy as to what's a good buy or not. So my winners, the things that I really picked out and was like, yeah, that's the stuff I'm really, really interested. First of all, the Scope AirTech. Impressive weight, impressive aero, spares from Extra. They seem to be everywhere at the moment. The only other observation there was it's a 25mm internal. So you're going to have to be quite careful with your tyre clearance because that 25mm internal is going to blow out a 28mm tyre to something like 30.6. That's very, very wide. Impressive that they're getting such a wide rim down to that sort of a weight, but I would just approach that with a little bit of caution depending on what bike you're riding. A standout for me was probably the averageness of Princeton's, but in possibly a good way because they are hooked and they blew out a tyre from 28mm to 29.5mm from just a 21mm internal. And that's quite impressive when you go through the other stats. It really is creating quite a nice tyre profile without actually adding an awful lot more material. They're also completely captive, there's no rim tape in there. They're relatively average CDA, about average weight, but above average price. The advantage for me is when I rode those, they were a very confidence-inspiring wheel. And at the faster speeds in this, Princeton actually became better. So their CDA became lower as it got faster, which is interesting to see because that was certainly my understanding of them, especially going downhill fast. It's a wheel set that I feel very confident riding. The other thing I felt confident in was because you have lots of different hubs. So you can choose White Industries, Tactic, well-known hub brands, Chris King, for instance, that you can definitely get spares for. So you can kind of invest in those Princetons with a fair degree of certainty that you're going to be able to keep them, maintain them for a good decade or so, because there's nothing really unusual about them. They look like a really solid option, although according to their CDA and weight, probably slightly on the expensive side, but I do have a nice paint job. So that to me was an interesting dynamic, I think. Okay, what else do we find? Oh, Campagnolo versus Dura Ace. If you're one of those people that like their wheels to match their group sets, it was pretty obvious that Campagnolo has definitely outperformed Dura Ace. Now, they are lighter and faster and significantly sexier, the Campagnolos. However, they are measuring the 60mm depth of the Campiboras next to the 50mm depth of the Shimano Dura Ace. So you could argue that it's a slightly unfair test. And that dynamic brings me on to the value winner. So because of the value wheel sets, it was a little bit unfair in that all of the value brands, so Parkour, Strade, the Scribe and the Hunts, they all submitted for test a different width. So the Parkour Strade is slightly different because it has a 50mm deep front wheel to a 54mm deep rear wheel. The Scribe submitted a 60, which obviously helped it score better in the aerodynamics, but score worse in the weight, obviously. And the Hunt sat there on a 50. So it's hard to say which is faster. But when it came down to it, all of those brands now use their own proprietary hubs. Weirdly, I never thought I'd hear myself say this considering it took Hunt so long, but a Hunt of those three now probably have the most comprehensive set of spares available and probably the best backup in terms of being able to call someone and ask them for technical help on what size bearing or pull spring or spacer that you might need to get your wheels up and running again. Parkour is way behind on that, although I do think they use Bitex hubs. I just wish they'd make that clearer on their website. Scribe, I just can't get my head around at all. So I think those are most of my key observations. So yeah, Scope and Princeton, who would have thought it? And for me, I'm picking those two, even though the NVs and Zips scored okay. I just can't be bothered with all that hookless nonsense that they're holding on to. There's no need. It was, oh, talking about Zips, one interesting observation that on the Grand Fondo one, they put forward the NSW wheels, and on the Cycling News one, they only put forward the Firecrest. So I think that the NSW should have performed better in aero testing. It's probably a shame that they didn't test that one because that would have made a really, really nice comparison. Well, if you're still listening, well done, because that was some pretty heavy information. Go and check them out. Get in the comments down below. Tell me what you learned from that test, and does it back up, reinforce, or does it contradict your own understanding of the wheels that you own? Please get down in the comments, because by sharing your knowledge is how we all add to our wealth of our own knowledge. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take it easy, and we'll back soon with the rest of the team. Cheers.